Hello and welcome to What a Scream, the horror movie podcast. I am your host, Ygraine, and I know I took a week off after my wedding. I just needed a bit of a break, get my head sorted, all that kind of fun stuff, have a bit of a come down from all the excitement. But we are back. We are back post Halloween. I hope everyone had a fantastic Halloween. Happy Samhain, happy Day of the Dead, if that's what you celebrate. And, even though spooky season is over, are we ever out of spooky season? We are now coming into Creepmas. We're coming into the Creepmas season, everybody, or Christmas, or whichever festivity you celebrate. But that's no excuse to stop being creepy and spooky. So yes, this is the podcast where I chat with a special guest every week about the horror films. And we discuss a particular subgenre or subject that I've previously randomly chosen, and we then discuss two films that have to do with that subject. So this week is all about body horror. It's a really popular subgenre. It's one that I didn't think I liked until I actually thought about it. I was like, no, I actually really like this subgenre. So body horror, also known as biological horror, is horror that intentionally kind of showcases gross and disturbing violations of the human body, which may come about through sex, mutations, mutilation, zombification, violence, disease, or unnatural body movements. It has its roots in early Gothic literature. Even though it's like a North American thing that it kind of came from, it is actually heavily influenced by Gothic literature such as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, such as Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray, and of course Jekyll and Hyde. It also has a lot of roots and a lot of connections with science fiction as well. Canadian filmmaker David Cronenberg is one of the main originators of early body horror films, with movies such as Shivers, Rabid, and his remake of The Fly. I always say body horror is horror which really gives you the ick. It really, it does things that makes you throw up a little bit in your mouth. I remember the first time I saw The Fly, I felt physically ill. And that, I've watched all those kind of torture porns, and I'd always be like, yeah, whatever. But when you see the human body do something so gross and there's so much body fluids coming out everywhere, just anyway, look, listen. So joining me to chat about grotesque and nasty, slimy body horror is my very special guest, Robyn Adams. And together we will be chatting about Cronenberg's VideoDrome, starring Debbie Harry and James Woods, and also 2007's Teeth. Enjoy this chat about two of the most disgusting horrors there is. So I would like to welcome to the podcast for the very first time, Robyn Adams. How are you?
Hey. Oh, I am doing fine. Thank you. This is my first time being a guest on any podcast. Wow.
Wow, so I am breaking your podcast guest cherry, I guess. Woo!
Oh, exciting.
I'm so honored. No need to be nervous. I'll treat you gently. So would you just like to introduce yourself to everyone and what you do?
Oh, hello everybody. I am Robyn Adams, and I do things. You'll probably know me already that I hosted a panel in February called Closet Monsters. It went down really, really well. You might also know me from being annoying on Twitter, but mostly, hopefully soon you'll know me from appearing in films such as The Moon is a Hologram, which is going into shooting next year, I think. And also, I'm just going to say it out here, I am writing and hopefully directing a segment in upcoming anthology film, Films Confiscated from a French Brothel, which I am very excited for.
That sounds like I want to know more. Can you tell me more, or is it very like hush hush?
I could tell you more. It's wonderful. So basically, Selene Kapsaski, who is directing a film called The Moon is a Hologram, she
Mhm,
previously did a film in Soho, which was this kind of burlesque trauma musical thing called
mhm.
Spiderlings Arachne in the UK.
Okay.
Anyway, I've signed on to her new film, which is The Moon is a Hologram, my first proper role in anything. And she gets in contact about an unfinished anthology film that she's making. I'm not sure I'm meant to be saying this, but which is kind of inspired by vintage erotica and so on.
Wow.
Anyway, I've been asked if I can do a segment in that, so I've been playing with ideas and don't know what's going to come together, but hopefully something good.
Yeah, I bet it will be amazing. It sounds incredible, and I cannot wait. Like, please keep me up to date on that because it sounds absolutely
Trust
incredible.
me, I will.
So I take it you're a fan of horror.
I absolutely
Yeah.
am. Yes.
So how did you first get into horror?
How did I first get into horror? The answer is Doctor Who.
Okay.
My absolute obsession with that show.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily an out and out horror show, but since a young age, I've loved it. Yeah, Doctor Who has been a long time obsession of mine, and many people I know, I met them through it. That
Hmm.
show just fascinates me. It's wonderful. I could talk for hours about it, but we're not talking about that there. But the thing is, Doctor Who is notable, especially in the UK, for just being the show that scared everyone as kids.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily explicitly a horror show,
Mm.
but it's got all variety of scary nightmares, and it introduced me to my love of monsters because
Yeah.
it invented Monster of a Week essentially, where every week you've got like this gooey rubber monster which appears new on screen, and they were frequently terrifying and preyed on people's fears, like a mannequin coming to life or
Hmm.
something. And I love that. I
Yeah.
love that so much. And that got me hooked on horror to begin with.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. I mean, even before kind of my generation of Doctor Who fans, like I'd always hear about like the older generations always being like the Daleks scared the crap out of me, the Cybermen scared the crap out of me, and never fully understanding that until the new like my generation of Doctor
Oh
Who
yeah.
started, where we had like the Weeping Angels, and there was like the clockwork baroque style monster
I
things.
I
They were so
particularly like
scary.
those.
They terrified me, like absolutely terrified me.
To
And
be
there was
honest, they're
also
pretty on topic for this podcast, actually, with the kind of like the harvesting of organs and everything.
right.
There's a lot of body horror in Doctor Who.
There is, and I know a lot of people like poo-poo it as like some silly sci-fi program, but you're like, it's not. It's actually terrifying.
There's a
Like
lot of scary concepts in it.
exactly. So do you remember the very first horror film you ever saw?
It depends what you count as horror, because I normally just I'm quite liberal with what I define as horror.
Mhm.
Uh, so technically, first thing I saw it was probably Beetlejuice.
Okay, yeah,
I'll admit it's not necessarily out and out horror,
yeah.
but it's kind of it's got that it plays with the macabre. It's got all of those
Mhm.
imagery of ghosts and ghouls and everything. And the thing is, I scared really easily as a kid, and I only watched this once I was about 14 or so,
Mhm.
and I loved it. In fact, I think that was the real beginning of my spiral into loving horror.
Mhm.
It was things like that, kind of, which were early things I got into, as well as things that I watched with my lovely girlfriend, who introduced me to a lot of wonderful horror films, particularly a lot of the Hammer horror films,
Mhm.
as well as The Haunting, which is a long-time favorite of mine.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say that Tim Burton is like a gateway drug into
Definitely.
horror because what it was the first thing that I watched when I was a kid, and I would count it as like almost like a childhood horror. Um, Edward Scissorhands is terrifying when you're a small child of 3 watching it and being like, "Oh my God, why has that guy got scissors with hands?" Like literally, it's Freddy Krueger's little cousin. Like,
Oh yeah. But it's also kind of Tim Burton's riff on the Frankenstein story,
yeah,
and that it is a misunderstood monster abandoned to figure out the world by himself. And
yeah,
kind of, as well as Tim Burton's films often play with outsider culture, which naturally appeals to me and appeals to many people who are into horror. And so, as well as just that lovely kind of like absolutely joyful, spooky fun, there's also this sense of kind of like seeing yourself represented on screen as one of the weirdos who doesn't fit in. And I love that.
Yeah, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head with that one. And I think that's probably why I was so, as I got older, I'm still so connected to Edward Scissorhands, is because of that whole Frankenstein connection. Like, I'm a massive Frankenstein fan. And so it just, anything that has that kind of Mary Shelley-esque sci-fi hit to it, I'm like, just latch onto it. So let's chat about our theme for this week, which is body horror. Are you a fan of body horror?
Yes, I am. To the fact that I know that these themes and subgenres for each week are chosen randomly, but I heard you mentioned body horror, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, I know. Don't need to rub it in that I'm trans. But like, yes, I love body horror. It's one of my favorite areas of horror. It was something I really, really got into. It just struck a chord with me. Yeah, I had always been like, oh, I'm not really into body horror. But then as I started to explore it more, I was like, actually, I realized I love a lot of body horror films. For me, perhaps when I was a bit more ignorant about body horror, I always thought like Saw and Hostel were body horror. And even though they can be seen to be a little bit body horror, not quite.
Yeah. A lot of people be like, that's body horror, but I don't necessarily agree anymore now that I'm a bit more well versed about body horror. What do you think kind of makes a body horror? What are the tropes?
Well, you see, you brought up say Saw and Hostel, and those are films which feature mutilation. They feature horrible things happening to the human body, as all horror films do in some form often.
Yeah.
Like most horror films involve some form of mutilation, but body horror is actively focused on the transformation of the human body and the unwilling transformation, or sometimes the willing transformation of the human body, and kind of the change that brings. Body horror is all about change, and that frequently features transformation into something, or even the loss of something or the gaining of something. There's a lot of body parts in wrong places as well. Like there are a lot of horror movies just about, imagine if you had this body part in this part of your body, like some of Cronenberg's films just come out like that. But I think the most important element of body horror is that every single mutation that happens is kind of emblematic of a real change in society. Like if you go back to Cronenberg's beginnings in the 1970s with the genre, like he wasn't the first with body horror, but he was the first to kind of classify what body horror was. And in terms of David Cronenberg, with his films like Rabid and Shivers, those are literally, first of all, they're about kind of like, imagine if there was a virus that really, really wanted you more than anything to spread it. Like, imagine if AIDS was sentient. Or a movie about what if you suddenly grew this vampiric proboscis, this kind of phallic thing in your armpit that drinks people's blood. And it's just like, wouldn't that be weird? But they're also representative of societal and cultural changes at the time and kind of disasters which affected people, because Shivers is all in all about kind of this suddenly sexually transmitted diseases are more widely known about in the 70s, and they're deadlier than ever. And it's kind of commenting on kind of the horrifying ideas of not only what if the spread was not only invisible but was completely visible and nobody could do anything now. And it deals with stuff like that. Every body horror movie is kind of, it's about change, but not necessarily just like someone's body melting. It's also about a change in attitudes and a change in your perspective, just thrown out of perception.
I definitely agree with you there. I always think body horror is like that feeling that your body is starting to fail you and you can't control it, and these weird things are happening and you don't know what's going on. And I think I went through a time when I was a teenager of watching very female-centric body horrors, of which there's not a lot of, to be fair, but I think when you are someone who, you know, presents as femme, or you have, you know, a uterus or a vagina, and your body seems very not your own a lot, obviously talking from my own point of view, because you go through this change and then there's so many people like commenting on your body and saying how your body should be, and there's people trying to take your body, and it's just like, oh my god, I don't have control of my body. There is, so again, kind of gendering body horror. A lot of the time we see body horror as very male, almost penis centric, whereas female body horror, or, you know, stuff that has femme characters, it's very much about, rather than losing control, it's taking control of, even though that change is happening, you're going to take control of it. What do you think of the whole, a lot of phallic symbols in body horror, let's say?
There are.
Yeah,
there are.
Dear God, there are.
There's lots of phallic symbols in a lot of horror. I mean, obviously it's talked to death about kind of in the slasher and so on, and stuff like Slumber Party Massacre. I know, didn't you do an episode on that?
I did, yes, and we even commented on how the poster looks like a poster for a porno, because the guy is standing with the drill between his legs. Like,
that poster is violation incarnate, pretty much.
Right?
Yeah. But it's in body horror as well. I mean, it's kind of, there is a lot of horror is in some form or another, when it's getting aggressive and when it's getting down to the gruesome and the frankly carnal, the way to phrase it, is that it's often, sadly, like a lot of our society, the focus is very penetrative. There is a lot of kind of like, for example, as I mentioned, Rabid pretty much has a killer penis. And there are so many movies like that. Go to Alien, which, yes, it's body horror, all right. That is about violation by a very overtly masculine monster.
Yeah.
It's, a lot of it is focused on the masculine, which is weird because when I get around to talking about Videodrome, which is one of my favorite films, it's not in a weird way. But that's interesting. My personal experiences with it is that I've also, to go back to a point you were saying earlier about female-led body horror, I have been very drawn to it because I really got into body horror once I realized I was transgender. And that sounds cliche, but I really did, because I really connected to these feelings of my body is changing and it's not me. And kind of like, there is a me inside here, and my body is growing and mutating away from that. And it's feeling trapped in that kind of state. And so I got into these films which would not only kind of like help me deal with this, but also kind of affirm me in kind of my femininity. And in particularly, weirdly, a lot of female body horror movies are coming of age stories. Like, for example, in things like Ginger Snaps, which is a take on the werewolf story. A recent movie I saw called Blew My Mind, which has a woman turning into a mermaid. Things like that. And I, weirdly, watching these, it kind of helped me come to terms with a feminine teenage life that I'd never had. And dealing with my own kind of late transformation. And so watching those, and indeed the reclaiming of your own femininity that I see in these stories, whether it's the lead character who is going through the body horrors or the lead character who is participating directly in the body horrors, in something like American Mary, which I deeply related to. Which it's kind of, these films are kind of a really wonderful antithesis to kind of, it's, as you said, it's the defensive and reclamatory kind of, if that's a word, kind of taking back kind of control over this destruction, as opposed to the overtly masculine half of body horror, which is destruction is happening and must be fought, as opposed to destruction is happening and I will take that for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point. So this, you kind of touched on it there, but what do you think when people are like, body horror goes too far, it's too gross? If you're into body horror, you must be like really fucked up. What do you say to those people that say stuff like that?
I say fuck them. No, I'm too nice. I'm too nice for that. To be completely honest, it's difficult. A lot of people, I know very many people who just can't get into horror, and unlike other things, I understand completely. It's an acquired taste. I can't get everybody into horror, because looking at some of this stuff, it is fucked.
Yeah.
This can get gruesome and harsh, but I really don't get the hate for body horror, because compared to the rest of the horror, because it's sure, again, it's an acquired taste, but yes, it's fringe, and yes, it's extreme, and people are saying that horror shouldn't be that. I think body horror is interesting because it's kind of, no matter what happens with horror, it's the last bastion.
Yeah.
Horror is always in some way unsafe. That's kind of, on the one hand, horror is something that I believe all people should feel safe in. But at the same time, horror is about pushing boundaries. It's about going to the places which are uncomfortable, and body horror is horror at its most visceral. This is your own flesh and blood are being warped, and I think that's important. And I also think that as a fringe idea, it's important because a lot of complicated ideas, particularly feminist ideas and particularly ideas about queer folk, are communicated specifically in body horror. There's a lot of queer connections to body horror, actually, and I think that's because it's so fringe and it's so kind of like cutting that no matter what happens, this is kind of like, yes, hell yeah, this is queer, and hell yeah, this is the most extreme form of horror we can come across. This is our ideas, unfiltered, without anybody coming up against it, because body horror can't be sanitized.
So let's move on to our first film then, which was your pick. You were pretty quick with this one, weren't you? You were very much like,
this one.
I know what I want to do. Bam. So do you want to introduce it and give us a brief synopsis, please?
Yeah, that's right, babes. We're talking Videodrome. It's weird saying that. Where do I even begin? So Videodrome is a story. It was a film by the wonderful director David Cronenberg from 1983. You're probably familiar with his work with stuff like Scanners, The Fly, the 1986 remake, and one of his most famous films is Videodrome, in which Max Wren, played by James Woods, absolute dickhead, just saying that out there, fight me if you disagree, is basically, he's a TV exec who's looking for pornography and the latest salacious material he can do to advertise his controversial TV channel, which is basically just Canada's equivalent of 80s Channel 4. And basically, he comes across this pirate station known only as Videodrome, which is clearly some kind of sleazy, potentially snuff material with hardcore BDSM. And by hardcore, I'm meaning like people getting butchered. Anyway, suddenly he slowly begins to have this addiction to the Videodrome tapes, one which it seems to be giving him vivid hallucinations and maybe even changing his own body. And as this goes on, he begins to kind of investigate where this is coming from and just why it's so potent. And weird things happen.
Yeah.
Weird things happen. Very weird things happen.
That's putting it lightly.
That's putting it lightly. Like, I'm hoping just as a note, before you watch this podcast, if you haven't seen Videodrome, pause, watch Videodrome.
Yeah.
We're going to talk some wild things that you can't unsee once we've mentioned it.
Yeah, and you need to see it as well. Like, if you listen to us talking about this, you're going to be like, no, you have to go see this.
Vile things happen in this. It's an amazing movie, but seriously, some pretty disgusting things happen in this film.
So this was Cronenberg's first film to get major Hollywood backing. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a flop.
It's a real shame. It was a bit controversial on release, not because of the graphic content and because of any of that, but because there's a scene where Debbie Harry, who is such an icon, she is my Zoom profile pic. I always feel like I'm catfishing people on the Soho Horror Fest socials when I'm on those, saying, I'm sorry, I don't look like Debbie Harry. That's the dream.
Yeah.
There's a scene where she puts out a cigarette on her breast. And that scene was so controversial that it was all over the tabloids, like the Daily Mail and the Sun, saying outrageous and so on, as opposed to, the movie where a tumor gun shoots someone and boils burst out of their head.
Right. I mean, I thought they would have gone for the vaginal chest cavity at
The
best.
vaginal chest cavity, trans culture.
Right. I thought they would have been more. Let's chat about James Woods and Debbie Harry's performance in this. As you said, James Woods is an absolute dick, and he plays an absolute dick in this film.
Yeah, and he's good at it.
Yeah, he is. He's really good. Yeah. Must be drawing on his own life inspiration.
I know, right?
I kind of felt like they underused Debbie Harry. I could have used, maybe that's just my personal thing. Like, please, more Debbie Harry.
I mean, Debbie Harry, always more Debbie Harry. Don't get me wrong. She's an icon.
Right.
And she plays it up as an icon. She's this absolute sex symbol. She's this feminine video goddess. And she's just partly what makes it so amazing is that she is just so in control of herself.
Yeah.
Like, she is so in control of her own identity and sexuality, and she is not afraid to show it every second of the film. She's such a brilliant character. Weirdly, I think Max Wren, James Woods' character, kind of wants to be her. You kind of, like, he's attracted to her, but maybe I'm projecting because I want to be Debbie Harry. It's just seeing kind of they're not too dissimilar in weird ways. There's a connection between them, and it's clear that what she has become, he is becoming by the end.
Yeah, because he seems a bit unsure about the whole, like, sadomasochism thing at the beginning, and then he's kind of like, no, I kind of get it. She's very much the introduction to that world, even though he was not that he was like immersed in it, but he'd seek out these kind of like hardcore pornography, hardcore violent films for his TV station, where she was the one that was like, no, this is actually what it's like.
Oh yeah, it's the thing is, it's when he receives the tape, it's kind of like it's horrifying to him, but he reluctantly picks it up. His friend at the station where they pick up TV signals, he takes it off, and he's just like, this is horrid, and his friend's just like, yo dude, this is so sick, this is so gross, you got to check this out. Whereas she responds to it in a weirdly kind of natural way. In fact, she sees it and she loves it. But like, not in a really weirdly alluring way. Like, she understands it, and that's strange considering you see this and it's murder. Like, this isn't just S&M. This is actual, like, this is harder than hardcore. This is the kind of stuff, like, you're going to get on a list of somewhere in the government if you watch this.
Exactly.
And she just watches it, and she's fallen in love with it, and she sells him on it instantly.
The way I kind of, again, maybe I'm projecting onto this as well, the way I took it was, so Debbie Harry represents horror fans, and I'm talking like us hardcore horror fans. James Woods represents the normal everyday Joe that, will go watch a James Wan film. And VideoDrome is like if someone went to someone else, have you seen Martyrs, or have you seen a Serbian film? You need to watch it. And that's how I felt that, maybe Cronenberg was talking about, like, the video nasties, obviously, because that would have been around the 80s. And he was talking about media and how different people are affected by media. And I kind of really related that back to me, because I would be the one being like, yeah, this doesn't bother me. Like, it's fine. It's cool. I really like it. It doesn't bother me, though. Like, it doesn't really get any feelings from me. Whereas if other people saw half the things that I watched, they'd be like, my god, I'm horrified but weirdly interested.
Oh, I'm going to get onto a weird subject that I'd been thinking about before doing this, because let's talk shock cinema. And specifically in relation to VideoDrome. And it'll relate to just everything we discussed today, which is, if you watch VideoDrome, you've been introduced to it one of two ways. You've been either introduced to it the Debbie Harry way, which is, this is a wonderful movie. This is just absolutely gorgeous cinema. You will love it. It is just this brilliant, sensual masterpiece. It's like a classic of sci-fi horror. Or you've watched it like his parody guy, just like, yo, dude, check this gross movie out with a guy with a vagina in his chest. And it's just, and it's kind of, there are so many films. I like to call it the human centipede effect. Where you hear about this, people say there are so many films which I came across which, just because of their notoriety, like a film which, saying its name, you can just bring up, like, this is the kind of things which, like, I'd hear talks about, like, these forbidden films. That's a bit video nasties, actually, coming to think of it. Some people just there's a weird allure to body horror in that not only does body horror have this sense of kind of, there are so many films which are masterpieces in it and will be shouted, so they have the same effect as when somebody pulls up a grubby VHS copy and says, you got to check this out, it's the grossest thing ever. Come and check out this vile thing. And I just love that.
What do you think is the film's central message? What do you think Cronenberg was trying to get across?
Oh, well, there's a lot going on in VideoDrome. But to be honest, I think, as mentioned previously, this was 1983. This was the height of a lot of censorship scares, both in the US and in Canada, where even in normally left-leaning Canada, there were still scandals about kind of the horrors of, horror film, which is weird because the Canadian tax shelter had been funding horror films in the country for the past few years, and suddenly it all comes up. And in the UK, there's the notorious video nasty scare, which is just born out of the most insane moral panic, which, to be honest, weirdly, the video nasties wasn't the start. It wasn't even the main end. It was a symptom of all of this panic. And so it's interesting to see there's strange things. Allow me to word this, to barely word this. So basically, in VideoDrome, kind of the core, I'll word this once I've explained kind of what's going on, and then it'll make sense.
Okay.
So basically, in VideoDrome, we have the whole, look at this sick, disgusting thing, VideoDrome. Look at this. This is the worst of the worst. This is the most depraved thing. How could anybody enjoy this? This is kind of your horror films, your typical stuff, kind of your video nasty panic type stuff, as well as pornography in itself, literally, kind of the moral panic around that. There's a lot of moral panic around pornography, and that's often led to unsafe working conditions for sex workers to produce their own content. But all of this kind of holier than thou moral panic kind of falls apart once you realize that, sure, VideoDrome corrupts people, it turns them into monsters, it makes their brains melt and tumors come out of their skin. But that only happens because kind of these holier than thou kind of these kind of conservative thinkers have put in things to show how bad it is, that literally these frequencies which corrupt you. And it's kind of this detail of kind of, okay, sure, this may look horrific, but it's only half as horrific as it is because people have kind of created all of this moral outrage and have done far worse things and done literally as bad things as they look. In response.
The way I see it is, they can be like, right, we're going to censor this because it's super bad, and they're putting this kind of controversy on it, and it's forbidden, and it's bad, and it's naughty, and people are going to watch it and then have this awful laden guilt on them, which messes them up even more than if they were allowed to sit in a controlled environment and watch a film where they can explore the deepest, darkest of feelings that we as humans naturally have, and go, okay, that's fine. I had that little outlet, and that's okay. It's okay to have this weird outlet. But when someone is putting that guilt on you, that's when people's brains start to go a bit. Guilt is a massive feeling that does a lot of damage, does a lot more damage than rage or fear or anything like that. It's one of the biggest emotions that royally fucks humans up. But if people were allowed to, this is even a James Woods, he says this in the film. He's we just allow outlets for our audiences to explore these feelings, and that's okay. And that's my problem with censorship, is that you're putting all this guilt on people, and that's when bad things happen.
And this is the part where I say something quite honestly personal about guilt and about, which really connects with Videodrome. And I'm gonna get quite honest here.
Yeah, thank you.
The thing is, and this will come back in when we discuss teeth later. That's probably not a spoiler. You probably already know that we're discussing. But there's a lot of guilt out there in society placed upon female sexuality as something that is taboo. Not only is horror taboo, but also just the very idea of women and their experiences of sexuality are often really condemned and often hidden from public view. And that I've also noticed that particularly in regards to transgender people, particularly transgender women, being shamed for their sexuality in public. In fact, the man who is basically just completely read off for a lot of the way that most transgender medical practice works is Ray Blanchard, who's basically his entire work is just about shaming transgender people as perverts, which I think is sickening. And I know this is wrong and bad, but it's kind of left this mark on me where I feel this shame about exploring my own sexuality. And it took me so long to kind of figure out who I am on that basis. And I still feel wrong for even wanting to think about and discuss and explore it because of all of this guilt constantly coming upon me. And I'm being told, no, this is wrong and perverted and will make me some horrible sex maniac. Watching Videodrome, I related to kind of that situation of the horrors of feeling that and feeling it's not just the allure of haha, I'm watching something that I shouldn't be watching. It's this is wrong and bad that I'm watching it and I should feel bad. Why don't I feel bad?
Thank you so much for sharing that with us and for getting so personal. But that's just even relating it just back to being a horror fan, that's how much horror relates to us. And all the time, when I say to someone, oh, I'm a massive horror fan, I'm really big into horror, they're like, how can you watch that? That's disgusting. What's wrong with you? How can you watch people just get blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, it's so much deeper than that. And especially when you are on the periphery of what is considered normal society, whether it's because you're queer or you're disabled or, you're basically not a cis white man, you do see these deeper meanings in films. And I think that's a real a good thing for horror that not many people realize. So yeah, that has been our PSA about why you should watch horror.
I've heard these phrases frequently championed by two people in particular. Many people online, but in particular the lovely Sam Weinman, who's making a Shudder queer horror doc, which I filmed stuff for and has not come out. And then also the wonderful Mitch Harrod, who runs Soho Horror Fest in London, which is a very queer-centric thing, which is the phrase, horror is queer.
Yeah.
And that's not just saying queer people naturally find their home in horror, it's saying that the genre inherently belongs to queer folk, just as it belongs to people of racial minorities, just as it belongs to disabled folk and to any form of marginalized folk, because horror is inherently based in these outsiders who find themselves in it. Horror was born of outsiders. A lot of both Dracula and Frankenstein were written by, so far as we know, queer folk. And I mean, Dracula was even based largely on Lord Byron, the man so queer, the word bisexual was invented for him.
When we think about perhaps later years, like relating it back to body horror, relating it back to the later years of body horror, it became very bro-y for a while. It was very like, very masculine, very like, dude, bro, especially if you consider this to be body horror ground, but especially if we're looking at Hostel, and especially Eli Roth, like he's
Eli motherfucking Roth. I hate him. I'm just gonna say that outright. Sue me, Eli Roth. You annoy me.
But he headed this thing of like bro horror, and it became very straight masculine, and it was just like, it felt really out of place. Like, no, this is not where this genre belongs. It doesn't. And like, thankfully, that has kind of come and died. And I think directors like Eli Roth, I mean, you know, at me if I'm wrong, but I kind of feel like they can't quite find their audience because they're so, I know I keep saying this word, but so bro-y that they kind of like, they can't quite find it and they can't quite punch it at its best because people are like, nah.
It's interesting that, because you mentioned Eli Roth, there's a really obvious body horror title for him, which is Cabin Fever, which was a bit of a cult hit. But I'm not gonna, this is not me hating on trashy B movies, just because they are. But Cabin Fever, I'll admit I've not seen it, but from the extensive segments of it that I've watched, it feels empty. Body horror normally symbolizes change and kind of unrest, and kind of, not all horror has to directly symbolize anything. It just has to be, well, good. All horror comes from somewhere. When you watch the early slasher movies, those weren't just the slasher as an idea that is already pre-established. These were born from deeper, darker fears which already existed in the world. These were just things which people were afraid of in these new, frightening times. And in terms of body horror, that came about too. And watching Cabin Fever be just kind of, oh look, some dude bros are dude bros, and then they melt. And it's just, it doesn't even seem like it's particularly trying to comment on the nature of that. It's not even really criticizing it. It's just dumb frat boy trash. And I'm not hating on dumb frat boy trash. And in fact, I'm going to champion street trash now, because I admittedly love that film, but that film has so much richness to it, weirdly. And yes, I know I'm championing the movie where people throw about a man's penis in like a game, and where someone accidentally flushes themselves down the toilet. But it's a vile, disgusting movie full of horrible gore, but at the same time, like, on the one hand, it's amazing, it's so creative, and on the other hand, it's also legitimately great capsule of the state of New York and a post-Vietnam world, and kind of the unrest of all of these homeless veterans who have come back from the war and are just living in this trashy nowhere zone, like some kind of Tarkovsky stalker exclusion zone, which is just this trash heap, where people just start melting and drinking alcohol and dying, and it's just, come on. The thing is that horror doesn't always need to directly symbolize something, but when I'm talking about that soul behind it, that raw power behind something as trashy as the movie where homeless people drink alcohol and die.
Getting back to Videodrome, what did you think of the special effects in it? Now, the special effects are done by the infamous, one of the masters, Rick Baker, who had also done American Werewolf in London, done that transformation scene. This was the first time I'd ever watched Videodrome, and I went into it being like, oh, you know, you see some 80s stuff, and like, I know Cronenberg is like pretty much the master of body horror. You know, obviously I've seen like The Fly and everything, and I'm like, that grossed me out. But I kind of went into it because it's quite an early 80s. I thought, oh, it wouldn't be great, you know, but some of it is like just the vaginal cavity that gets me every time, and like the noises of it.
Oh yeah, it's a slimy film. A lot of body horror films are slimy in many different ways. I guess slime is an inherent part of the genre. But Videodrome is slimy in a kind of different way. There's a lot of films like, as I mentioned, Street Trash is full of neon exploding slime, and you get stuff like that, stuff like Slime City and so on, of lurid titles. But Videodrome is not. Videodrome is uncomfortably wet and kind of squelchy in an uncomfortable way. It's very fleshy. It's very organic. It's just looking at how it looks. I think the weirdest part of Videodrome is that it's just enough to not be excessively kind of like outlandishly, unrealistically strange. It's completely weird what's happening to these people, but it's done in an uncomfortably, slightly plausible way. Everything's just pulsing, and it's always moving. That's the important thing. It's always moving and squelching and everything. Even the videotapes are squelching. The TV has veins. That's a horrible detail, which I noticed. I think a TV moving and being flashy, that's weird enough, but it has veins. Then it's real. Then it's real and can live. Then it's real and can touch you even.
Yeah, that's a bit creepy. Like, I know when that scene came up, I was like, what? What do you think is kind of the symbolism behind the flesh gun, the hand flesh gun?
The hand flash gun. I mean, the gun's just part of him. Then he's hell bent on virus. Damn, it's getting to me. Hell bent on violence. Like it's just kind of. I think it's partially just the inevitability of these scenes where he has been programmed to kill. He has no choice. The gun is part of him now, and I think that's really wonderful and strange because there's some real body horror stuff. It's debatable in Videodrome what's real and what's not, what's just a hallucination. And the gun hand is just a hallucination. It's confirmed by the end. But it's clear in his mind that he can't let go of the gun because what he has to do is he has to go in and he has to shoot that man, and it's just unstoppable. It's inevitable. He was born to shoot. And I think that's just really horrible and visceral, and just Cronenberg does this so well, just taking these horrifyingly brutal concepts and just adapting them in the most literal, disgusting way ever. Like even in his movie Crash, which isn't necessarily a horror movie, which is the infamous car sex movie, which I think is a key body horror title, because there is a scene where a character describes his motivation as the transformation of the human body by machines. Kind of that description of just the car crash as a concept, and kind of this weirdly, gorgeously, poetically eroticized kind of picture that this creates of this horrible carnage turned into something weirdly beautiful. Cronenberg does this good, and
definitely.
Videodrome the flash gun is literally just being hell-bent on violence means the gun is part of you now. You were always meant to do this.
So would you recommend Videodrome to horror fans?
Absolutely, yes. I would recommend it to everybody. I would recommend it to your local priest. I would recommend you to your local priest if you've seen it. It's very, very good. I would highly recommend it. It's a gorgeous film. It's just wonderful. It's really compelling, and it's also the sort of thing you can brag to your friends about. You could say you've seen Videodrome and you've seen a man have a VHS tape inserted into his stomach vagina. So big recommend.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always for learning your history, especially when it comes to horror, and I definitely think people should just, if you're like, okay, you really want to know, if like me, initially you were like, oh, Saw and Hostel are body horrors, if you actually want to get a bit learned, then I definitely think going back and watching Cronenberg's films, you just need to do it to know where body horror comes from, and just to look at the special effects as well. Like, I'm mad in special effects. I absolutely love it. And just to look at it and be like, how was that made? Even reading up about it, I was reading up about how Rick Baker did it, and it's mad, like some of the things they did. And I really think that it's one of those films that you just kind of have to watch, you know, if you're into horror and you're into your body horror, you just have to watch it.
Yeah, I gotta say to horror fans, if you don't like body horror, give this a try. That's not just me pranking you. Give it a try.
Yeah.
You might not quite know what body horror is until you've seen this absolutely nuts film.
Yeah.
And then watch Society, because I hate you. If you haven't seen that, brief tangent on Society. It's gross. That's it.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard it's on my to watch list.
Watch it. You don't get any refunds if you don't like it.
Okay, let's move on to our second film, which was kind of my pick. So I chose Teeth, which I mentioned before is a more kind of female-led body horror, kind of pushing against the more phallic of body horrors. Although there's a lot of penis in this as well, but
there is a lot of penis.
We'll get onto it. So it's a 2007 American horror comedy written and directed by Mitchell Lichtenstein, and it stars Jess Weixler as Dawn, and she is a teenager who is really big into her abstinence, and she does a lot of preaching at, you know, a Christian group for younger kids, telling them to save themselves for their future spouse. And she's very into saving herself until she meets a young man, and she begins to develop completely normal teenage feelings and teenage urges, and she then discovers that she has a condition known as vagina dentata, which is teeth inside the vagina. And it is through a series of, unfortunately, through a series of like rapes, attempted sexual assaults, that she finds this out. It's kind of unfortunately, but fortunately at the same time. And yeah, the whole film is her basically finding out how shit these men are. And then she kind of starts to use it for her, you know, advantage. What do you think about Teeth? Are you a fan?
I'm a big fan, and I completely love it. It gets such a bad rap. I do know exactly why.
It's great.
I know exactly why, and I will get onto that and about the controversy of Teeth. I recently watched Jennifer's Body for the first time, which is a movie I really, really love. And that movie flopped on release.
Yeah.
And people hated that for ages. And I watched it. And recently, people have loved it and have been singing its praises. Teeth hasn't got that response yet, which is weird because it's kind of similar in tone. And also because it deserves one. It deserves that kind of reappraisal.
Yeah.
I watched it during the first lockdown for the first time. And I just watched it completely blindly on Shudder, and I ended up buying myself a copy, which is on the DVD shelf behind me. But I just fell in love with this film. It's just such a charming, funny, perfectly wrong film.
Yeah. It's so wrong, it's right.
It is a legitimately brilliant, biting satire on a lot of the ways that society treats women.
I have seen this film about 5 times, and every time I watch it, I just love it even more. Like, I'm not a fan of horror comedies. I find sometimes it's really hard to balance the horror and the comedy, but I feel like Teeth is just such a perfect balance.
It does
like
so well.
Funny moments, and you know what? A lot of that comedy is down to Dawn, because she has these moments where she has these like reactions to the situation, and it's so funny. Whether it's her make
physical performance.
It's just perfect comedic performance. Like, her face is hilarious, and she just has like the reaction that I think most teenage girls would have, where they're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, it's just a perfect performance, and it's hilarious.
And I'm so sad that she didn't go on to become this mega star after this, because she's so compelling as a lead in this. Like, the way she sells this damn character just so perfectly as the most wonderfully awkward teenage girl who slowly changes perfectly just over the film.
Yeah.
And kind of her uncomfortable, slow maturity in it's a really interesting film in that we watch her mature unwillingly over the course of the film, and kind of it's uncomfortable and it's horrible, and it's all the more satisfying because we don't really get a resolution. We don't really get, hey, it's all fine now. But we get to the beginnings of where she's kind of like, hey, I might have got a handle on things now. And it's amazing to see the character, like, she's still clearly the same character, but has grown and progressed so much. Sure, through horrible things happening, but she's grown and progressed and become more confident in herself and who she wants to be. And it's a great character arc.
It is. And I loved the way that it came from like feeling like it was something that was completely out of control and she didn't know what was going on and blah, blah, blah. And it went from that to her being in control and being in control of her own body, even though these terrible things had happened to her. And she was surrounded by terrible fucking people. But she took control of it. And like you said earlier, it's the difference between James Woods' character and something out of his control happening, and he went into complete destructive mode and was like, I've got to kill everybody, to Dawn, where she's like, right, shit's gone down. Killed a few people, I've maimed a few people, but I'm going to take control and I'm going to do this. And it's just such, I saw it when I was a teenager. I saw it pretty much the year it came out. So I was 18 and I was still in that, well, I was until up until fucking 26 when I had a child. But like, I was still in that phase where I was like, I feel like I don't have control over my body, because whether it's being surrounded by shitty people who are trying to take advantage, or it's just like society in general telling me my body's not right, or it's not a good body unless I look a certain way. But seeing someone take control of that and being like, okay, yeah, I have this biological thing, but I'm not going to try change it. I'm just going to fucking take control of it. And that really speaks to me with Teeth.
I love how frank the film is about kind of not just being completely open about things, but also it's both funny and also kind of all too real about how normal the film and how mundane the film treats its central subject. Like, it isn't like, sure, it's strange and weird and frightening, but at the same time, it's more just kind of a strange, confusing inconvenience. And in fact, it's amazing to see this. It's heightened with a semi-normal world with semi-normal characters kind of dealing with this completely bizarre thing like it's just another day. And it's real, and like, this is just something that happens to people. But at the same time, this isn't something that happens to people. So you see Dawn look on the computer about it, and she just finds mythology. That makes me laugh. It doesn't make a big deal of that, but it makes me laugh. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Kind of like, and even better, the fact that she just thinks that this is how every woman is to begin with, because she has been taught so little on female sexuality and anatomy. And that's sad but funny.
I mean, even like where there's a scene where they're in school and they're learning about like reproductive organs, and they're talking about the penis, and the teacher's like, this is the penis, blah 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 blah, and then they turn to the next page and it's meant to be about the vagina and the vulva, and there's a sticker over a picture of the vagina, and the kids are like, why is there a sticker? Like, how come you can talk about the penis and not the vagina? Like, what's the difference here? And the teacher's like, the vagina, of course we've got to cover it up. And it just, that scene was so like, it's so intrinsic when you're talking about bodies, either female bodies or basically anything that's not masculine kind of, it's okay for someone to go around with like mask nipples, but it's not if you've got boobs. Like, you're not allowed to show your nipples if you've got boobs. And you're like, where, like, problem. Right? I mean, the double standards of it all. And I loved that was put in Teeth. I thought that was brilliant.
I think the best part of that scene is that the teacher refuses to say the word vagina. I think that's and the thing is, I laugh at that scene, but the worst part is I'm thinking this has happened somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Like you could definitely,
recent memory.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And it probably still is happening. Like
definitely.
Yeah. Let's talk about the gore and the actual body horror of it, because I mean it is about vagina dentata, but you actually, funny enough, talking about not seeing vaginas, you don't see the vagina, you don't see the teeth.
You see a tooth. But
as it's
out of.
Yeah. We see a lot of severed penis. Why do you lots of it, so much severed penis. Why do you think that they decided to omit any sort of, when you think about body horror, it's always like someone's peeling a fingernail off or pulling a tooth out. So we always get close-ups of this person's body that this mutation or this change is happening to. Why do you think teeth didn't show that?
Well, to be completely honest, it's part of two things. Well, first of all, just showing severed penises is funny. I'm just going to say that outright. This film was sold with extreme, all packaged all over it. It was sold as the most horrifying, extreme thing. And me watching it, I'm just like, lol. But and it is funny. You get stuff like a crab carrying a penis. That bit's an iconic moment. But at the same time, I think it's because of perspective. Like, compared to something like Cabin Fever, which was just so point blank of what it was showing and just like, this is happening, we have a real sense of perspective with Teeth. This is Dawn's perspective of discovering herself. And I think the reason why there's a dream sequence, which is funny, because like she, not really a dream sequence, but she fantasizes whilst she potentially attempts to masturbate and explore her own female sexuality. She fantasizes about her future wedding, which is really funny. But at the same time, it's just as she's about to actually, masturbate, we see like a bit of stock footage from the giant claw of this, not the giant claw, that's one with the scary bird, the black scorpion. Of this kind of vaginal toothed monster, kind of this fear of it. And I think the reason why all of the shots we see of Dawn are there is because, well, one, she's afraid of it. She doesn't want to look at it, so we don't look at it. And two, partially because I just think it works better to the imagination. I just think it's more interesting to imagine what it might look like, and I think it adds to kind of the idea of this forbidden thing, kind of that the film is commenting on, and that I think it's better for us to not see any full demonstrations of what the toothed vagina looks like. There are other films which have done that, but for this film, I think for the story it's trying to tell, I think the perspective shows a character who. Well, also, I think showing the vagina would take away from the fact of, weirdly, I think it would take away from her autonomy as a character. I feel like her presence as an empowered, monstrous feminine would be taken away if the vagina was treated as some kind of scary object that has happened to her, as opposed to this is a defense mechanism which has grown into her as a person that she takes control of as this human being. And I think that's wonderful.
I definitely think it would have taken away from the film. Like you said, it just wouldn't have had the same, we were talking about soul earlier, but it wouldn't have had the same soul. It would have just been like, oh, here's another film that, is going to exploit a young woman's body. And, and I just really love the fact that it was just like, I mean, I've noticed this a lot with extreme horror and body horror, is there's just so much penis. Like, in every extreme horror you watch, there is pretty much always going to be a penis. And it was just so refreshing to have like a lot of penis, but a lot of it was detached penis. One of the bits that really made me like, and it still makes me like, even on my 5th, 6th watch, I was like, is when she's got this like really nasty stepbrother who's just like, he's so fucked up, like no amount of therapy could fix that. The worst person ever. Right. And he is obsessed with her. And she decides that she's going to get a form of revenge. And she has sex with him, but then she bites his penis off. and his dog comes in and eats his peanut.
Oh yeah, it's gross. It's gross and horrible. I think it's also the worst part is that it's pierced. The worst part is that the dog just spits out the head. That's the gross bit. That's the worst bit of it. It's wild. It's wild about, like, even if it wasn't a horror comedy, I'd still be laughing talking about this. I think it's a wonderful thing in the horror genre that sometimes you just laugh about something that you've seen, not always because it's funny, but because it's just so wild to talk about something that has actually happened in a film.
I love thinking about, like, what did Mitchell Lichtenstein, was he like, lads, I've got this amazing idea for the end of this scene, like, amazing idea, and I would like to have been in that pitch room when Mitchell was pitching this idea. I'd love to be a fly in the wall and people's reactions.
I'd love to have been in the pitch room for describing the gynecologist scene.
Oh my god!
Imagine describing, so he gets his entire arm stuck in her vagina and slams her on the table.
So would you recommend Teeth to horror fans?
Absolutely. It really, really needs a reappraisal. It's just such a wonderful, funny, legitimately, it's still incredibly relevant to this day. Like, on the one hand, it was clearly made in 2007, and on the other hand, it's just so relevant. The problems it discusses are still problems and which we're having conversations about today. It's a brilliant film, and it's also just really funny. And you can prank your friends by showing them the dog eating a penis. It's gross.
So out of the two films, I mean, I kind of know which one you're going to choose, but out of the two films, if you had to, like, pick one over the other when it comes to, like, body horror, which one would you choose?
Well, to be completely honest, I have an absolute joy talking about both of them. I've got to say that Teeth is a more fun one. I want to say VideoDrome's a bit of a downer, but it's wonderful. I think I can't help but say VideoDrome because A, it's an essential, and B, I watched it at a key point in my transition, and the bit where Debbie Harry kind of coaxes James Woods into kind of transcending his body and like not having to be what he was and instead become this free, weird video spirit. Really resonated with me. The line, "Don't be afraid to let your body die," hit me way harder once I remembered, oh wait, that was from this. And it's when I rewatched it for this podcast, that hit me quite hard when that scene came around. In fact, it's a brilliant ending scene, so weird, so strange. It's got mincemeat TV.
I know, that's so gross.
David Cronenberg's films always have something poignant and profound in every scene. It's just like, oh yeah, but there's also the mincemeat TV.
I enjoy Teeth more because of how I resonated with the film, and also just because it's funny and it's something you can put on with your mates and watch and be like, ha 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 ha, like you said. But I just think that if we're talking definitive body horror, you got to go with a Cronenberg film.
Yeah, exactly. Cronenberg was, and to be honest, I mean, Cronenberg was the master of body horror. I guess the new master of body horror at this rate, since Cronenberg is mostly retired. I know he's making another film soon with Kristen Stewart, yes. But weirdly, his son has been doing really, really good with Antiviral, which really won me over, and Possessor. Possessor is this generation's VideoDrome. VideoDrome is still absolutely relevant and holds up today, but Possessor is this generation's VideoDrome, and it's more trans. It's more trans somehow, with Andrea Riseborough hopping into people's bodies and weird stuff happening and weird perception stuff, and she has a penis, which is amazing and wild, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I'm just thinking, wait, is this implying what I think it is? Because that's her body, not the person she's possessing. It looks like her.
So can you recommend any other body horrors?
I absolutely can. I mentioned Society earlier, which is a hilarious film. I'm not even joking. It's an actual barrel of laughs, which is this wonderful, bizarre anti-capitalist satire from Brian Usner, who produced Reanimator. I'll mention that in a sec. and it's just a wonderful movie. I've kind of given it away, but it's a body horror film, but everybody knows that now.
Yeah.
You originally weren't meant to know it was even a horror film, but it is, and it's a very gross one, in which there's this guy who begins to believe that his family and everybody in his neighborhood, all of these rich people, are secretly part of a weird sex orgy cult that kill poor people. And yeah, you see how that turns out. It brings a new meaning to eat the rich.
Yeah.
Or they eat you. And I also have to recommend Reanimator by Stuart Gordon, who was a brilliant master of neon slime. There's a lot of neon slime in Reanimator. If you've not seen that, that is a brilliantly theatrical, dry horror comedy with icons such as Jeffrey Combs, who's known for Reanimator, and a lot of other things, but mostly Reanimator.
Yeah.
And Barbara Crampton, who is the definition of Scream Queen.
Yes.
Kind of just in this wonderful story about malpractice at medical schools. And it's also very, very homoerotic. In a weird way. It's just two guys being dudes, hanging out, stealing corpses, and being very, very close to each other. And that's before you get to Bride of Reanimator, which I recommend because it's more body horror. In which they're living together like this old gay married couple. Kind of like they're young, but they act like they're old and gay and have been married for 20 years. And Herbert West, our beloved main character, is just getting bored around the house and has decided that he is going to make things out of what he can find. So there is the Bride of Reanimator, but there's also things he makes when he's bored. And it's just so you get to just see some fingers with an eye on it. And it's just like Herbert, why'd you make that? And it's just like, because I thought it was funny. And From Beyond too, which is brilliant. Also for Stuart Gordon, which is all about transcendence and stuff, and kind of like what if you found a machine which could open your third eye? And kind of awakening yourself to new senses. And Barbara Crampton is in that, and Barbara Crampton is particularly she's a bit Debbie Harry in that one. She's a bit Debbie Harry in VideoDrome in that one. You'll see why when you watch the film. It's wonderful, and she is an icon.
So before we go, I always ask my guest, what is your favorite horror film?
Oh, you want to know? Well, I'm going to be predictable. And I'm gonna get kind of pseudo profound about this one, but it's not what you'd expect.
Right.
But it's what you'd expect for anybody else. It's The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing. And you think, that's weird. I'm kind of like hyper femme. So like, I'm watching this movie with just a bunch of dudes in the ice. No women other than like a computer. which Kurt Russell kills by pouring beer into it. And it's just like, so why is that my favorite? And the answer is because it's just that damn perfect. I think that what it does, John Carpenter talked once about how his best cinema experience ever and his favorite horror movies ever are the 50s Fly and the 50s Thing. And I think those both kind of exemplify combined what makes perfect horror. And it perfectly gets the fear of what you see, the grotesque visuals, that kind of like it plays to the utmost with what you can achieve visually, the horrible practical monsters which take on any form coming out of you, the gorgeous lighting and the atmosphere of the snow. It masses what you see, all of the graphic, grotesque, you can't look away from the screen stuff. That is what makes horror. But it also masses what you don't see. The fear of something around the corner, the dark pit shafts, the feeling that any one of you could be the Thing, that tension, the blood test scene is both horrifically graphic, like just this colourful splash of gore across the screen. But it's also this fear of any moment one of you could be unveiled as the Thing.
So that was my chat there with Robyn Adams about body horror. And specifically, we chat about 2007's Teeth, directed and written by Mitchell Lichtenstein, and VideoDrome, which is from 1983 by David Cronenberg, starring James Wood and Debbie Harry. a few other body horror films if you're interested in them. We did mention a few in our chat. There is also The Fly, The Brood, Scanners. There is Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is a great body horror from Japan. There is also the Human Centipede series if you have a stomach strong enough. So thank you so much to my special guest, Robyn. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Don't forget, we are on social media, Instagram and Facebook at What a Scream Podcast. I'm also on Twitter at What_Scream, where you can follow with the podcast, but you can also follow with my writing and my journalism as well. As always, I hope you are staying horrific, and goodbye.